Hi, and welcome to 5 Things You Need to Know in Order to Have a Successful Podcast. My name is Sabrina. I am the host of Pretty Sure Podcast. I'm also a podcast coach for millennial entrepreneurs and the CEO and founder of a PR podcasting agency. I'm very excited because podcasting is my favorite topic, if you couldn't tell from all of my hats that I wear. So I'm going to be starting off with number 1, which is one of my favorites, mindset. As long as you believe in yourself and as long as you think you can do it, you can basically do anything. Have a podcast guest that has over 300K followers, be the number 1 top charting podcast, have 100,000 downloads, literally everything, as long as you believe in yourself. That is it. Now, on to number 2. You have to get comfortable with being vulnerable. Because if you are a public figure, such as a podcaster, there might be times where you might not be inspired to talk necessarily about a topic, but you know that you have a certain experience, and it's almost as if you have a certain job to represent that to your audience, because you know that you can make a difference, you can make an impact, and you can change some lives by talking about that specific topic that you don't really feel like talking about. And boy, do I have a little example for you. So the only topic I've ever said that I was never going to talk about in my podcast was toxic love. And guess what I did? One day I was inspired to talk about it. I wasn't expecting much of it. I actually thought it was going to flop and my audience was not going to be interested in. And lo and behold, guess what happened? It is actually the number 1 best rated podcast episode on my show, and I received tons of messages from it and encouraging posts and all of those things. So goes to show that really you never know what is going to resonate with your audience unless you actually think about them. Which brings me to number 3. Tech is not the most important thing about a podcast. Yes, it is useful. Yes, it is important because nobody wants to listen to a podcast that has really bad audio quality. But the number 1 thing that makes a podcast successful is to go at it with a strategy. Build a brand rather than just a podcast show, and trust me, it'll be built for the ages and you will see success. The other thing that comes with that is knowing your audience, knowing your listeners, and creating content for them, as well as having a big reason why you're doing a podcast in the first place. That will keep you motivated and put you up for success. Now, number 4 is actually consistency. This one is super important because the more you do something, the more you become an expert at it, but also the more people know you. So the best example I can give, and it's one of my favorite stories, is about Joe Rogan. So if you're not familiar with Joe Rogan, he actually made a groundbreaking deal in 2020 with Spotify to be the sole distributor of his podcast. And a little known fact is actually Joe Rogan has been podcasting for 10 years. People think he's become an overnight success, but what's actually made him successful is consistency. Imagine if you would have stopped after 5 episodes and said, I only have 20 listeners, why am I doing this? Things would look a lot different, right? The last lesson that I want you to take away from these 5 things is number 5, which is you have to get comfortable and you have to accept failure and sucking at something. The reason behind this is because no one starts out an expert in anything. So you have to know that more likely than not, your first podcast episode is going to be terrible. Your first business idea, whatever it is that you're doing, it's just not going to be the best. But that's also the good part about that, because no other podcast episode is going to be as bad as the first one as you improve as you go. Trust me, if you were to listen to one of my first podcast episodes and listen to me right now after 50 podcast episodes in, you would think we're 2 entirely different people, and even recording myself in a video such as this. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these 5 things you should know about making a podcast successful. And my name is Sabrina. You can find me on Instagram as @thatgirlsabrina, or my podcast show @Pretty Sure Podcast on Instagram, Apple, Spotify, and wherever you can find podcast streamings. Have a lovely day and see you next time.